comes to rock and roll legends, Keith Richards stands in a category all his own. As the Rolling Stones' iconic guitarist, he's shaped decades of music. But beyond his timeless riffs and larger-than-life stage presence, Keith has built a reputation for being astonishingly blunt. He's never been afraid to mock, belittle, or outright dismiss the work of his peers, even if those peers happen to be towering figures in popular music. Over the years, his commentary has soared from playful jabs to jaw-dropping put-downs, sparking countless debates among fans and critics alike. So, what drives this outspoken rocker to target some of the biggest names in the industry? Is it an unfiltered loyalty to authentic music, a desire to keep his contemporaries on their toes, or simply Keith being Keith, a man who's never minced words about anything, including his own failings? Today, we'll explore a series of moments that put Keith Richards and his acerbic wit in the spotlight. From controversial tributes to scathing album reviews, from heavy metal takedowns to disputes with other rock stars, get ready to hear how Keith Richards' sharp tongue has left a mark on music history. One of the first instances that raised eyebrows happened when Keith took aim at Elton John over the way he honored the late John Lennon. Elton had always been close to Lennon, dedicating live performances to him, and even collaborating before the tragedy that claimed Lennon's life. But as Lennon's memorial plans took shape, Keith sensed something disingenuous behind the spectacle. The tribute felt more self-serving than heartfelt, like a grand occasion orchestrated for publicity rather than genuine grief. To him, Elton's over-the-top approach strayed from the free spirit Lennon had been. Lennon was, in Keith's words, a friend who would come around and enjoy the Stones' gritty, unfiltered lifestyle. He wasn't the type who needed a lavish send-off, but rather an honest remembrance that matched his irreverent humor and down-to-earth personality. Keith's candor here shines a spotlight on a broader theme. He's deeply protective of friends he's lost, especially those who embodied a raw authenticity he holds dear. When he saw something that looked like a grand show for someone who didn't crave that kind of pomp, he called it out. It's a revealing glimpse into Keith's view that rock and roll should never become a parade of self-congratulatory events. If there's any glitz involved, it must spring from an honest place. Lennon's absence in Keith's life also weighed heavily. In interviews, Keith recalled Lennon crashing at his home, getting outrageous for a night, and momentarily forgetting he was a Beatle at all. Those memories were precious, loaded with mischief and camaraderie, like stories from a pirate crew rather than the biggest band in the world. So, when Elton pulled out all the stops for a public tribute, Keith found the whole ordeal distasteful. Still, this wasn't the only time Keith's criticism lit a fuse. The Rolling Stones guitarist has never confined his opinions to personal friendships. If there's a piece of music or a persona that rubs him the wrong way, he'll declare it to anyone within earshot. That fearless approach to sharing his thoughts has, of course, earned him legions of admirers who love his brutal honesty, though it's also ticked off plenty of fans who respect the artists he tears down. Picture it. The Beatles have just unleashed Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Critics are dazzled. Fans can't get enough. Overnight, the album is hailed as an innovative masterpiece that forever changes rock music. Fast forward decades later, and you've got Keith Richards looking back at this legendary record and calling it a mishmash of rubbish. That's right. The same album so many critics and musicians place at the pinnacle of 20th century pop culture was, for Keith, little more than a noisy experiment gone wrong. This wasn't just a gentle disagreement either. He was direct, scoffing at the swirling arrangements, the kaleidoscopic vibe, and the conceptual ambitions that made Sgt. Pepper's so groundbreaking for its time. Why would a rock stalwart take aim at a pillar of classic rock? Part of it stems from Keith's lifelong commitment to the rawer side of music. While the Stones may have dipped into psychedelia here and there, they never fully abandoned their bluesy roots. To Keith, the heart of rock music isn't found in elaborate concepts or lavish production gimmicks. It's found in grit, sweat, and soulful simplicity. And Sgt. Pepper's, in his view, tried too hard to be something else, losing that authentic punch along the way. The remark carried enough sting to ripple through the music world. Think of it. One half of rock's greatest rivalry, Beatles versus Stones, telling fans that the Beatles' high point was basically nonsense. Was it sour grapes? An attempt to keep that old rivalry alive? Or an honest expression of how Keith truly felt about the shift from blues-based rock to something more theatrical and experimental? Regardless of the motivation, the statement amplified Keith's persona as the ultimate anti-establishment figure in an industry where the Stones themselves are considered old guard. He wasn't about to bow down to a record just because it sat atop so many greatest lists. That unapologetic stance fed into his mythos. The man who refused to die, despite rumors about his health, and who refused to sugarcoat his take on anything. Sgt. Pepper's is now a milestone in pop culture, beloved by millions. But if you ever find yourself in a room with Keith Richards, don't expect him to join the chorus of praise. Led Zeppelin is practically sacred in the pantheon of heavy guitar music. From Jimmy Page's mesmerizing riffs to Robert Plant's shrieking vocals, they've influenced everything from hard rock to heavy metal. Yet, for Keith Richards, they just didn't pass the smell test. In various interviews over the years, he's pointedly called them hollow, claiming they never quite took off as a cohesive unit. On one hand, Keith had praise for Jimmy Page. He recognized Page as a phenomenal session guitarist, someone with near-legendary skill in the studio. He even acknowledged John Bonham's thunderous drumming power. But that's about where the compliments ended. For Keith, Zeppelin's music lacked the essence he craved, genuine soul and a certain unrefined spontaneity that connected with listeners on a gut level. Take them in parts, his comments seem to suggest, and they're extraordinary. Put them together and it doesn't move me. Now, to some fans, this felt like sacrilege. How could Keith, a man revered for his rock and roll authority, miss what millions of Zeppelin fans adored? But that's just it. Keith's perspective has always been built on an unwavering dedication to blues-based authenticity. For him, the flamboyance of Zeppelin was more style than substance. Even Robert Plant's dramatic presence didn't sway him. Keith recognized the showmanship, but saw it as part of that English tradition of flamboyant frontmen, from Roger Daltrey to Mick Jagger himself. The difference in Keith's mind might be that while Mick's theatricality stemmed from the soul of R&B and early rock influences, Plant's approach leaned heavily on epic wails and mystical lyrics. That apparently didn't impress him. In calling Zeppelin hollow, Keith stirred the pot among classic rock fans, proving once more that he'd never apologize for his opinions. He simply doesn't have that filter which says, "This might offend someone." He's more interested in maintaining his own sense of what's genuine in rock music. And if that means dismissing an entire generation of arena rock gods, so be it. In the 1980s, Prince was the epitome of cool. His genre-defying music, electrifying performances, and boundary-pushing style made him a global phenomenon. So
to say there will never be another artist like Prince, not just because of his musical genius, but also because he served the best shade on a silver platter. We bow down to you, Prince, for having the best reactions ever.
So, when Keith Richards labeled Prince overrated, it felt like a bucket of cold water on one of the hottest acts in the world. This dismissal happened at a time when Prince was riding high with hits like Purple Rain and When Doves Cry. Critics were showering him with acclaim, fans were enthralled, and his fusion of funk, rock, and pop was groundbreaking. To Keith, though, Prince's elaborate showmanship and flashy persona just didn't cut it. He saw it as lacking real musical depth, overshadowed by image-driven theatrics. But why would he single out Prince? Partly it might have been cultural or generational differences. Prince embraced everything from androgynous fashion to sexual openness, forging a path that challenged traditional rock norms. Keith, though a pioneer of rebellious behavior, was rooted in a more direct brand of rock authenticity. Loud guitars, minimal fuss, raw energy. Prince's flamboyant style might have been a bit too polished for Keith's taste, especially considering the Rolling Stones were always a bit rough around the edges. That doesn't mean Keith denied Prince's raw talent. Anyone who's watched Prince shred on a guitar knows the man had serious chops. The contention was more about Prince's overall package, the carefully curated style and drama that surrounded his music. For Keith, the glitz overshadowed the substance. There's also a lesson here about how Keith Richards prioritizes an earthy, gut-level connection in music. He's never been a fan of anything he perceives as layered too heavily in theatrics or production. If the core foundation isn't bluesy, gritty, and organic, he may well toss it aside. For Prince fans, that attitude might sound outrageous. But then again, being outrageous has always been part of Keith's charm, or aggravation, depending on your viewpoint. If you thought Keith's comments about Led Zeppelin were scathing, his attitude towards heavy metal, particularly Black Sabbath, goes a step further.
Fucking crazy now, okay? Are you ready?
He once quipped that heavy metal was great for comedy, suggesting he saw it as more of a caricature than a legitimate music form. For a genre built on dark riffs and dramatic stage setups, hearing it described as comedic was a tough pill to swallow. So, why Black Sabbath specifically? Sabbath, led by Ozzy Osbourne's haunting vocals and Tony Iommi's crushing guitar, laid the groundwork for what we now call heavy metal. Their themes often delved into darker territory, apocalypse, fear, and the occult. For many fans, this was mesmerizing. For Keith, though, it apparently felt contrived, a theatrical spin, far from the rootsy rock and roll he championed. He once mentioned that he never liked that sort of music and found its over-the-top nature amusing. It's easy to see why someone who thrives on the unpolished blues-influenced grit of early rock and roll wouldn't gel with the dramatic flair of doomy guitar tones and gothic imagery. He didn't just single out Sabbath either. His blanket dismissal of heavy metal underscores his broader belief that flash and spectacle should never eclipse the music's soul. Naturally, heavy metal fans took offense, interpreting his words as dismissive of the entire movement. After all, Sabbath influenced countless bands across multiple generations, from doom metal to grunge. Yet Keith Richards, ever the contrarian, seemed unshaken by that legacy. He stuck to his guns, repeatedly emphasizing that it wasn't his thing, and that, in his world, metal felt more like a parody than a powerful genre. Still, for all the chaos Keith stirs, there's a consistency in his perspective, authenticity, simplicity, and a loyalty to the music that shaped him in his early years. If you break too far from those roots or rely too much on a theatrical gimmick, Keith will have no qualms calling you out. Oasis burst onto the scene in the early 90s, crowned as the saviors of British rock. They famously admired the Beatles, but they also showered respect on the Rolling Stones, positioning themselves as heirs to the UK rock tradition. Yet, despite that reverence, Keith Richards didn't hold back his criticism.
Liam, you and Twitter why do you stay on Twitter?
I like winding people up, yeah, without a doubt, man.
You really do, don't you?
No, without a doubt, that's what it's about, you know what I mean? It's like, everyone's a bit square at the moment, aren't they, you know what I mean? Everyone's just a bit serious and miserable, you know what I mean? I do like winding people up.
First, he found the Gallagher brothers' constant feuding unprofessional, pointing out that real bands shouldn't be consumed by petty infighting. In the volatile world of rock, internal battles aren't uncommon, but Keith viewed the Gallaghers' drama as overshadowing their music, something he clearly disdains. He believes a band should exist to create raw, unfiltered tunes, not to become a soap opera for the tabloids. Second, Keith saw Oasis's sound as derivative, too close to the legacy that the Rolling Stones had carved out decades earlier. For someone who prides himself on forging an authentic style, it probably felt insulting to watch another band replicate that vibe without the same fiery spirit. The Gallagher brothers might have thought they were carrying the torch, but Keith perceived them as merely rehashing old glories. There's a story that sums it up. When Noel Gallagher finally met Keith, he recalls Keith looking him over and firing off a signature Richards one-liner, basically questioning whether Oasis ever did anything truly fresh. Noel responded with witty banter of his own, but the moment crystallized how little awe Keith felt for the new generation of rockers. Even though Oasis had massive hits and sparked Britpop mania, Keith was unimpressed. Fans of Oasis often dismissed Keith's take, arguing that the Gallagher brothers brought a new twist to classic influences. But Keith's perspective remained unwavering. If a band lacks genuine originality and thrives on spectacle or controversy, he's not going to mince words. If you're going to succeed in Keith Richards' world, you'd better do it with raw honesty. To understand why Keith Richards feels entitled to call out just about anyone, it helps to look at his own life and storied career.
When we first moved in there, though, both Keith and our mums used to do our washing for us, and they used to bring it up. And both Keith and our mums would somehow get us. I can't remember how we got there, but they would deliver somehow clean clothes.
British Railways it was sort of delivered, right? I mean, but no, the place was absolutely filthy.
And it's still there.
And it had a sound system, and in actual fact, we were sitting on that bloody carpet when we came up with the name Rolling Stones.
Yeah,
because that's where we were making the phone call. Wanted to put an ad into Jazz News, which was like a hip magazine, you know.
Yeah, for jazz people.
And Brian's on the phone, and we're playing at so and so on Wednesday, and they said, yeah, but what are you called?
What do you call? What's your name?
And we had
we had to agree.
We had Muddy Waters' album on the backside, and the first track was called Rolling Stone Blues.
And we said,
we looked at it, this is costing us money, Rolling Stones.
That's it.
Born in 1943, he's lived through every era of modern rock, from the British invasion to 21st century digital releases. Few musicians can claim that level of first-hand experience, and even fewer have survived it without losing their rebellious spark. Substance struggles and indestructible myth. It's no secret Keith battled serious substance problems. Over the years, rumors swirled about him ODing or having near-fatal experiences. He famously quipped about snorting his father's ashes, though whether he was joking or not remains up for debate. These stories contributed to the legend that Keith Richards can't be killed by conventional means, fueling jokes about him being a rock and roll zombie who simply refuses to let go of this mortal coil. Clashes with the law, Keith's many run-ins with the authorities added another layer to his reputation. From busts for possession to being labeled a bad influence by conservative figures, he always emerged with that signature grin, seemingly unscathed. His defiance of legal constraints mirrored the broader spirit of rock as an anti-establishment force. Feuds within. The Rolling Stones. Even the Rolling Stones themselves have been rife with internal tensions, most famously between Keith and Mick Jagger. Keith's commentary on Mick ranges from loving praise for his showmanship to scathing remarks that poke fun at Mick's appearance or ego. Still, they have remained bound by a musical chemistry that's endured for decades. Keith's readiness to critique Jagger, his own bandmate, shows that no one is above his scrutiny, not even the frontman who co-founded the Stones with him. Commitment to the roots. One of the main reasons Keith feels justified in his critiques is his steadfast loyalty to rock's roots. Influenced by blues legends like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, Keith always measured authenticity by how close an artist stays to the essence of the genre's African-American origins. He never forgot those gritty, soul-stirring chords that define the blues, nor the rebellious spirit that became rock's driving force. Anyone straying too far risks Keith's scorn. When you combine this personal history, surviving the wildest excesses, maintaining success for over half a century, and staying loyal to raw, bluesy authenticity, it's little wonder Keith feels he's earned the right to an opinion. In his mind, if you haven't lived the life, tested the limits, or honored the roots, you're not standing on solid ground to claim rock credibility. Why people still love him. Ironically, many fans admire Keith for the same reason he annoys so many others, his unyielding honesty. There's something refreshing in an industry often dominated by polite sound bites, corporate endorsements, and mutual backpatting. By refusing to fall in line, Keith ensures that rock and roll's rebellious spirit never completely fades. After hearing these tales of Elton John's Lennon tribute slammed as self-promotional, the Beatles' masterpiece being dismissed as rubbish, Led Zeppelin labeled hollow, Prince declared overrated. Black Sabbath mocked for comedic effect, and Oasis criticized for unoriginality. One question looms: what motivates Keith Richards to be so merciless with his peers? Part of the answer lies in his unwavering belief in authenticity. Keith has spent a lifetime championing the rugged simplicity of blues-based rock, and anything that feels showy or theatrical automatically lands in his crosshairs. His criticisms aren't just random jabs. They reveal a core philosophy that music should come from the gut rather than a place of choreographed spectacle. Another factor is his sheer longevity. Keith has witnessed musical trends rise, peak, and vanish. He's seen how hype can inflate an artist's reputation long before their music proves its staying power. To him, a short-lived frenzy means nothing. Longevity and a real emotional connection with the audience are what count. There's also an element of keeping rock and roll dangerous. One might argue that, by speaking his mind without fear of backlash, Keith is preserving the rebellious spirit that started it all. Politeness and unanimous praise rarely define a movement founded on shaking up the status quo. In a world that thrives on carefully curated images, Keith's critiques act as a counterbalance, reminding us that rock was meant to be raw, restless, and sometimes offensive. Finally, his willingness to skewer anyone, even friends, points to a man who values truth over diplomacy. He's not trying to climb career ladders or curry favor. He doesn't need more fame or fortune. He's already earned his place in rock history. So he's free to say exactly what he wants, and it resonates because it's so starkly different from the polished remarks we often hear. Keith Richards' legacy, therefore, isn't just about electrifying guitar riffs and unforgettable Stones hits. It's also about a brutal honesty that has defined a portion of rock's cultural DNA. Love or hate his opinions, you can't deny their impact. He keeps discussions about music lively, and his words continue to reverberate through the industry. If music is meant to stir emotions, then Keith's unfiltered critiques do exactly that. Ignite passion, provoke outrage, and spur debate. In the end, maybe Keith's harshest statements remind us that true rock and roll has always been about pushing boundaries. Whether you're a devout Beatles fan or you swear by the riffs of Led Zeppelin, there's something oddly compelling about a man who never hesitates to say, "I'm not impressed." After all, if everyone agreed on everything, music would lose its edge, and that's the last thing Keith Richards wants. So, the next time you crank up Sgt. Pepper's, rock out to Led Zeppelin 4, or sing along to a Prince classic, remember? Somewhere, Keith Richards might be rolling his eyes. But that's precisely why the rock world still needs him, to keep it honest, keep it raw, and keep it just a little dangerous.